picture this. It is 1872.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And these two guys walk into the booming, just incredibly money-soaked city of San Francisco.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Yeah, and they look exactly like what you'd expect from a couple of hardened, completely luckless prospectors, right? They're sun-baked, wearing clothes that are, slightly too small.
Probably covered in dust.
Covered in dust, and they're staring wide-eyed at the big city buildings, like they've literally never seen a paved road before in their lives. But here is the kicker. They are carrying this extremely heavy canvas bag.
And inside that bag?
Inside the bag, uncut diamonds.
A lot of them, right. And rubies and emeralds, too.
Tons of them. So these guys, they end up sitting across from the most ruthless, highly educated, just skeptical financiers in America at the time.
We're talking about the absolute titans.
Exactly. The founder of Tiffany & Company, Charles Tiffany. Baron Rothschild, just the titans of industry. And these two bumbling prospectors, Philip Arnold and John Slack, they proceed to successfully scam these billionaires out of what would be millions of dollars today.
That is wild.
Right. Selling them the rights to a completely fake diamond mine in Wyoming.
And, the most fascinating part of that historical swindle isn't even the fake mine itself. It's the psychological weapon they use to completely bypass the defenses of the smartest men in the room.
Because they didn't use slick presentations.
No, not at all. No brilliant financial projections. They weaponized their own apparent stupidity.
They leaned so hard into the act of being country bumpkins. And because they made those billionaires feel so intellectually superior, the billionaires' threat detection radar just, it completely shut down.
Exactly. I mean, nobody suspects the person they are secretly laughing at.
That is so true. And that story, honestly, is the perfect entry point for what we are doing today. So welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today for you listening is to explore a massive, truly fascinating collection of historical case studies, all centered around Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
And we should probably clear the air immediately on this one.
Yes, definitely. The goal of this conversation is not to hand you a playbook for becoming some sort of Machiavellian supervillain.
Right. We are not advocating for evil here.
No, we are here to decode the hidden, often uncomfortable mechanics of human behavior. We really want to understand the underlying strategies of self-preservation that, actually dictate who succeeds and who gets crushed in our modern world.
Because the core premise running through all of our sources today is that modern society, despite all our technological advancements, is fundamentally no different than a Renaissance aristocratic court.
Okay, let's unpack this modern courtier concept. Because on the surface, we live in a democracy, right?
Right.
We have HR departments, we have social norms, we have this general expectation of fairness and transparency.
We have the veneer of those things. But the Renaissance court was actually the exact same way.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah. It was a place where overt violence was heavily frowned upon. You couldn't just challenge someone to a sword fight in the middle of the palace. That was uncouth.
Right, you'd be exiled.
Exactly. Everything had to appear civilized and elegant and perfectly polite. But underneath that glittering surface boiled an absolute cauldron of dark, primal emotions. Greed, envy, lust, resentment.
So the argument is that we haven't evolved past those emotions. We've basically just changed the wardrobe.
Spot on. We just changed the wardrobe.
So if you operate in the modern world, whether that's, climbing the corporate ladder, navigating local politics, or even just managing a complex social circle, and you play by the rules of fairness too literally, what actually happens?
Well, you become prey.
Wow.
Prey. If you take the rules of perfect decency at face value, you will inevitably be outmaneuvered by those who actually understand the game. Napoleon Bonaparte actually had a brilliant phrase for this.
Oh, the velvet glove thing.
Yes. He advised his generals to place their iron hand inside a velvet glove. The velvet glove is the smile, the polite email, the public commitment to teamwork. It's the HR-friendly language.
And the iron hand.
The iron hand is the unyielding, ruthless pursuit of your own strategic interests.
I have to admit, that sounds incredibly cynical.
Uh-huh.
And I know a lot of people listening right now might think, well, I just refuse to play power games. Like, I'm an honest person, I'm opting out of the court entirely.
But the research we are looking at says that is a massive trap, doesn't it?
It does. It says it is the most dangerous trap of all. Because the supposed non-players are often the most adept manipulators in the entire room.
Yes. You really have to look at power as an amoral game. It is neither inherently good nor evil. It is simply a dynamic of leverage. and it's judged entirely by its effects.
Wait, so if someone in a boardroom is demanding total equality or insisting on, like, perfect, brutal honesty, they're actually just executing a power play.
Almost always. I mean, think about the mechanics of perfect honesty. Okay. Human beings are fragile. We rely on social lubrication, politeness, tact, little white lies, just to survive each other on a daily basis.
Right. If you told everyone exactly what you thought of an all day,
Yeah.
society would collapse.
Exactly. So someone who weaponizes perfect honesty is intentionally dispensing with that lubrication. They are often using it as a coercive strategy to dominate a room.
Oh, to put others on the defensive.
Yes, all while wrapping themselves in this impenetrable armor of moral superiority. Or, consider the tactic of publicizing your own weakness.
Oh, the PR of powerlessness.
Right. Because true powerlessness, genuine vulnerability, doesn't usually hire a PR firm.
It hides.
It absolutely hides. So when someone loudly broadcasts their lack of power to gain sympathy or force guilt onto others, they are utilizing a highly effective, deceptive power strategy. They are basically throwing dust in your eyes.
That is deeply unsettling, but logically, it makes complete sense. So if we're all trapped in this giant scheming court, and the people claiming not to play are actually the most dangerous,
yeah,
what is the absolute prerequisite for surviving this? Where do you even start?
You start entirely inward.
Okay.
The absolute non-negotiable foundation of power is the mastery of your own emotions. Every historical failure we are going to discuss today stems from a raw emotional response.
Because emotions cloud reason.
They do. They severely narrow your field of vision. Anger is obviously the most destructive because it makes you predictable, right? It makes you reactive.
Right. Someone pokes you and you explode.
Exactly. But the sources point out that love, affection, and gratitude can actually be just as dangerous.
Because they blind you.
Because they blind you to the self-serving interests of the very people you trust the most.
Which brings up this striking visual metaphor from the sources. The ancient Roman deity Janus, the god of doorways and transitions.
The one with two faces.
Yes, two faces. One face is looking continuously into the future. It's the embodiment of this phrase, no days unalert.
I love that phrase.
Me too. It is constantly running scenario analysis, anticipating permutations, scanning the horizon for pitfalls.
And the other face is looking backward into the past. But, and this is key, the text is very specific about how it looks at the past. It's not looking back to hold grudges, right?
Precisely. Because holding a grudge is an emotional weight. It anchors you to a past conflict.
And it dictates your future actions based on revenge rather than actual strategy.
Right. The face of Janus looks to the past strictly for data collection.
Data collection, yeah.
You look at your past mistakes, or the mistakes of others, solely to educate yourself. You extract the mechanical lesson of why a failure happened, you integrate that data, and you swear never to repeat it. That is the internal state you have to achieve.
All right, so we've built the foundation. We have mastered our emotions. We are operating with cold, clear reason like Janus. But how do we take that internal state and project it externally to the world?
If power requires an iron hand and a velvet glove, how do we actually design that glove?
You design it using the architecture of illusion, concealment, and mystery.
Because the human brain is wired to trust appearances.
We have to. I mean, if we scrutinized every single interaction, every smile, every handshake for ulterior motives, the cognitive load would be paralyzing. We wouldn't be able to function.
We use appearances as a shortcut just to survive the day.
Which means the shortcuts can be hacked.
Hacked, yeah. And one of the greatest hackers of human perception was Otto von Bismarck in 1850.
Oh, this story blew my mind. Set the stage for us here.
So it's 1850. Bismarck is a passionate Prussian patriot. His ultimate dream, like his life's goal, is to unite a fragmented Germany.
Okay.
And he firmly believes that the only way to achieve this is to go to war against Austria, which was the dominant power keeping Germany divided at the time.
So he is a known hawk, pro-war all the way.
Exactly. But the King of Prussia, Frederick William IV, and all his current ministers, they are terrified of war. They want peace with Austria at almost any cost.
So the country is at this boiling point. War fever is running high in the public, but the king is desperately looking for a way out.
Right. And Bismarck gets up in Parliament to give a speech.
And he does the unthinkable.
He does. He gives this passionate, fiery speech against the war. The war he has literally dreamed of.
Wait, why?
Well, He talks about the madness of spilling Prussian blood. He defends Austria's actions. He basically advocates for the exact policy of appeasement that the king desperately wants.
But why would he betray his own core belief like that in public? That seems suicidal for a politician.
Because he wasn't playing to the public. He was playing entirely to the king. The king is so incredibly relieved to have a prominent hawk validate his desire for peace that he essentially falls in love with Bismarck.
Oh, wow. So he won over the ultimate decision maker.
Exactly. Shortly after this bizarre speech, the king appoints Bismarck as a cabinet minister. Bismarck uses that position to quietly consolidate power, eventually becomes prime minister, and then he quietly builds up the Prussian military over a decade.
And then absolutely crushes Austria in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866.
Yes, he got exactly what he wanted.
Because he used a smokescreen, a decoy object of desire.
Right.
Bismarck understood that if you explicitly state your intentions, you give your enemies a target. They can prepare defenses, they can rally against you.
But if you passionately advocate for a decoy, in this case, peace.
People's brains accept the appearance as reality. They relax, they completely lower their shields. By the time they realize your true intention, the trap has already snapped shut.
That flows perfectly into another tactic of concealment, which is saying less than necessary.
Oh, yeah.
Because a smokescreen is actively putting out false information, but sometimes the best illusion is just a total void of information.
King Louis XIV of France was an absolute master of this.
The Sun King.
The Sun King. His ministers would spend days, sometimes weeks, preparing these massive, heavily detailed policy proposals. They would come into his chambers, debate the merits of a decision, sweating over every single detail, just waiting for his royal decree. And what would he do?
He would listen in complete silence, just stare at them.
Stare at them. And when they finally finished, he would simply look at them with a completely unreadable expression, say, "I shall see," and leave the room.
I shall see. It's brilliant because silence acts like a Rorschach test for the human ego.
It really does.
When you don't speak, you create a psychological vacuum. And people are absolutely terrified of vacuums. They will instinctively rush to fill that silence with their own words.
The neuroscience behind this is fascinating, actually. Human beings are basically machines of interpretation.
How so?
Well, we have this desperate need to know where we stand in the social hierarchy and what others are thinking of us at all times. When you withhold your thoughts, you deprive them of that essential data.
Which makes them nervous.
It triggers a mild anxiety response. So to relieve that anxiety, they start babbling, they over-explain. And in their rush to fill the silence, they accidentally reveal their insecurities, their hidden alliances, their actual motives.
What's the ultimate velvet glove? I mean, you aren't interrogating them. You aren't shining a bright spotlight in their face. You are just standing there quietly, and they end up interrogating themselves.
And by saying so little, when you finally do speak, your words carry the weight of an oracle. You appear far more profound and powerful than you might actually be.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We've talked about projecting the illusion of agreement, like Bismarck, or the illusion of profound power, like Louis XIV. But what if the most devastating illusion you can project is that you are an absolute idiot?
This brings us right back to our diamond miners. Law 21. Play a sucker to catch a sucker.
Yes, the Wyoming diamond mine scam of 1872. Arnold and Slack. You mentioned earlier that their greatest weapon was acting dumb, but let's look at the actual mechanics of how they pulled this off.
Let's do it.
Because they didn't just walk in off the street, you know? They laid a very deliberate, elaborate trap.
They did. They actually traveled to Europe first and bought about $12,000 worth of real but low-grade uncut diamonds, rubies, and sapphires.
$12,000 back then was a fortune.
It was a massive investment in the con. They returned to the U.S. and literally salted a patch of land in Wyoming, just burying these gems in the dirt.
Wow.
Then they went to San Francisco and played their roles to absolute perfection.
And the psychology here is just masterful. They walk into the Bank of California looking like they haven't bathed in a month, acting incredibly paranoid.
Right, looking over their shoulder.
Yeah, and they ask to store a sack of valuables in the vault. They don't ask for investors. They don't try to sell anything at all. They just act like terrified peasants who stumbled onto a dragon's hoard.
And that is the trigger. The bankers and financiers look at these two men and immediately feel intellectually superior.
And when you make someone feel significantly smarter than you completely disarm their suspicion radar.
The banker's brain basically says, these men are simply too simple to deceive me.
So the financiers actually force the miners to take them to the site. The financiers dig in the dirt themselves, find the planted gems, and convince themselves that it's real.
They did the work for the con men.
Exactly. They practically beg Arnold and Slack to take their millions to buy out the claim.
Because greed narrows your peripheral vision. But importantly, it only works if the target doesn't feel threatened by your intellect.
A famous con artist known as the Yellow Kid, Joseph Weil, used a very similar tactic, but instead of playing dumb, he played to his target's desire to be an insider.
Oh, the fake boxing match. This story is legendary.
Hell, it's so good.
So, Weil is trying to con this incredibly sharp real estate millionaire named Sam Geisel. Weil wants $35,000 for some fake properties he doesn't own.
And $35,000 was a massive amount of money.
Huge. But Geisel is way too smart to just sign a contract without scrutinizing the fine print. So Weil knows he has to create a distraction so massive that Geisel's prefrontal cortex, his critical thinking center, is completely overwhelmed.
He needs a sensory overload.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Weil discovers that Geisel has a weakness for boxing and a fascination with the allure of the criminal underworld.
Oh, he finds his Mark's fantasy.
Right. So Weil literally sets up a fake gym. He hires actors. He brings Geisel to watch a quote-unquote promising prize fighter train.
But the fighter is terribly out of shape, right?
So out of shape. So Weil confides in Geisel that the upcoming match against the champion is entirely fixed. The champion is going to take a dive.
And Geisel is thrilled by this.
He loves it. He feels like he's on the inside of a massive illicit secret. He's watching them rehearse the fake knockout. He is so distracted by the adrenaline of the underground boxing ring that he totally forgets to audit the real estate deal.
And then the climax of the illusion. During the actual fake match, the out-of-shape boxer takes a hit, stumbles, spurts blood from his mouth, and collapses on the mat, seemingly dead.
It was chicken blood.
Chicken blood mixed with hot water inside a rubber ball hidden in his mouth. I mean, the production value of this con is incredible.
But to Geisel, it is a sudden, terrifying reality. High-stakes physical danger overrides everything else in the brain. The amygdala completely takes over.
Fight or flight.
Yes. Geisel believes he is now an accessory to manslaughter, so he flees the state, completely abandoning the $35,000 he gave Weil for the real estate. He is just relieved not to be in a prison cell.
That is wild. The Yellow Kid used chaos, but Count Victor Lustig used the exact opposite to bypass someone's threat radar. He used selective honesty.
Law 12. Using honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. And there is honestly no better mark to illustrate this than Al Capone.
Right. Al Capone is arguably the most ruthless, paranoid gangster in American history. He trusts absolutely no one. You look at him wrong, you end up in the Chicago River.
And Count Victor Lustig, who is a known con man, walks right up to Capone and asks him for $50,000, promising to double it in 60 days through a special investment.
And Capone, surprisingly, hands over the cash, which is crazy on its own.
But the genius of Lustig is what he does next. He doesn't invest it. He doesn't flee to South America. He takes Capone's $50,000, puts it in a safe deposit box, and waits exactly 60 days.
He literally just sits on it.
He just waits. Then he goes back to Capone, puts on this incredible performance of being terrified and heartbroken, and says, "Mr. Capone, I am so sorry. The investment failed. The money is completely gone."
Capone's guards are probably practically reaching for their guns at this point. Capone must be furious.
He is. But then Lustig reaches into his coat, pulls out the original $50,000 in cash, and sets it on the desk.
Oh, man.
He says, "I couldn't double it, but I could never steal from you. Here is your principal back."
Capone is stunned. He is completely derailed. He actually says to Lustig, "I expected you to either give me $100,000 or nothing. But this is honest?"
And Capone gives Lustig a $5,000 reward.
Which was Lustig's actual goal the entire time. He never wanted $50,000. He just wanted a quick $5,000. And he got it by hacking Capone's paranoia.
Let's really break down the mechanics of why that worked. Think of Capone's mind as a highly advanced cybersecurity system.
Okay, I like this analogy.
His firewall is programmed to block specific types of malware: greed, lies, betrayal, and physical threats. He is braced for impact 2047.
So when Lustig returns the money, it's like sending a friendly ping to an open port.
Exactly. It's a Trojan horse. An unexpected gesture of honesty to a paranoid man is an incredible emotional relief. It forces Capone's threat detection system to momentarily power down because it defies his entire worldview that everyone is constantly out to get him.
And in that brief window where the firewall is down,
Lustig drops the actual payload. The subtle manipulation that results in the $5,000 reward. Selective honesty profoundly distracts the brain.
Okay, so we've explored the velvet glove. We know how to project illusions of agreement, how to use the vacuum of silence, how to weaponize perceived stupidity,
Yeah.
and how to hack paranoia with selective honesty.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But what happens when the illusion fails? What happens when Al Capone figures it out, or when you are simply backed into a corner and forced into overt conflict? How do you fight without destroying the very structures you need to survive?
That requires a very specific calculus of conflict. And the first rule of that calculus is Law 9. Win through your actions, never through argument.
This makes me think of Michelangelo.
The statue of David, right?
Yes, so he is commissioned to sculpt the statue of David. He spends years carving this absolute masterpiece. He finally unveils it to the mayor of Florence, a man named Soderini.
Now, Soderini is a politician, not an artist, but he fancies himself an intellectual, right?
Exactly. He looks up at this towering, perfect statue, points to the face and says, "The nose is too big."
Oh, the ego on that guy. Now, Michelangelo knows mathematically and proportionally that the nose is perfect. He also knows that Soderini is standing directly underneath the giant statue, looking up at a severely distorted angle.
Right? Forced perspective. A normal person would immediately start arguing. They would pull out their calipers, they would lecture the mayor on optics, they would defend their ego.
And Michelangelo doesn't do that.
Because arguing with someone in a position of power over you is a strategic disaster.
It is. Even if you win the argument on logical grounds, you have inflicted a narcissistic injury on your patron. You have made them feel small, foolish, or uneducated in front of others.
And they never forgive that.
Never. They might concede the point in the moment, but they will harbor a quiet resentment that will absolutely manifest later. Words are just too easily interpreted as attacks.
So what does Michelangelo do? This is so clever. He asks the mayor to follow him up the scaffolding, right up to the face of the statue. And Michelangelo secretly grabs a handful of marble dust from the floor.
I love this detail.
He takes his chisel, places it near the nose, and starts tapping the chisel with his hammer. But he doesn't actually cut any stone at all. He just slowly lets the marble dust fall from his hand, creating the visual illusion that he is altering the nose. He steps back and says to the mayor, "Look at it now."
And Soderini looks at it from this new, proper vantage point on the scaffolding and says, "I like it much better. You've made it come alive."
It is brilliant.
Yeah.
He won completely without uttering a single defensive syllable.
He changed the mayor's perspective, both literally and figuratively. The cognitive resistance to words is incredibly high. People filter your arguments through their own insecurities and biases.
But a demonstrated proof.
A physical action. It bypasses the language centers of the brain and speaks directly to a person's physical reality. You simply cannot argue with marble dust falling.
But Michelangelo is dealing with a slightly arrogant patron. What happens when you are dealing with a true rival, an enemy who actively wants to destroy you? I have to admit, I struggle with Law 15 from the sources.
Rush your enemy totally.
Yes, it sounds so barbaric. It sounds like a PR nightmare. In the modern corporate world, if you quote-unquote crush a rival totally, you look like a psychopath. You alienate your peers, you invite lawsuits, you damage your own brand. Is this law actually practical, or is it just vindictive?
That is a very valid modern pushback, and I think we need to define what crushing actually means in the specific context.
Okay, please do.
It doesn't necessarily mean physical destruction or even public humiliation, which, as you pointed out, causes massive collateral damage to your own reputation. Crushing your enemy totally means systematically removing their capacity to retaliate.
Okay, distinguish those for me. What does that look like?
Okay, if you embarrass a rival executive in a meeting, and you manage to take away their project, but you leave them in their job with access to the CEO and all the company data, you haven't crushed them. You have merely wounded them.
And a wounded animal is far more dangerous than a healthy one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have created a smoldering ember of resentment. They will smile, they will pretend to submit, and they will spend the next 2 years quietly plotting your downfall.
They become a fatal antagonism.
Yes. To crush them means maneuvering them into a position where they are transferred to a different division or fired, or their credibility is so thoroughly dismantled behind the scenes that no one will ever listen to them again. You remove the operational capacity for revenge.
The sources illustrate the danger of ignoring this with the story of Shang Yu and Liu Bang from ancient China.
It is one of the most tragic examples of this dynamic in all of history.
Put it up for us.
These were two generals, originally allies, who fought together to overthrow the Qin dynasty. But once the dynasty fell, they naturally became bitter rivals for the ultimate control of China.
And they were polar opposites, right?
Total opposites. Shang Yu was a towering, aristocratic warrior, a battlefield genius who came from a noble bloodline. Liu Bang was of peasant stock, not much of a fighter, but a brilliant, wily strategist who deeply understood people.
And Shang Yu had Liu Bang dead to rights multiple times.
Over and over again. At the famous banquet at Honggate, Shang Yu's advisors explicitly told him, "Assassinate Liu Bang right now." Liu Bang was physically trapped in the tent.
But Shang Yu hesitated.
He did. He felt this twisted sense of aristocratic mercy, or perhaps it was just an ego-driven desire to let Liu Bang live, just so he could continue to humiliate him on the battlefield.
Right, and then later, Shang Yu had Liu Bang's army completely surrounded and starved.
Again, instead of finishing him off, Shang Yu accepted a treaty and pulled his troops back.
He kept leaving the ember smoldering.
Yeah.
And Liu Bang was not burdened by aristocratic honor, was he?
Not at all. Liu Bang used every single moment of mercy to rebuild his forces, forge new alliances, and study Shang Yu's weaknesses.
And eventually the tables turned.
They did. Liu Bang surrounded Shang Yu's exhausted army, and Liu Bang did not hesitate for a second. He slaughtered the forces, put a massive bounty on Shang Yu's head, and forced the mighty warrior to slit his own throat on the banks of the Wu River.
Shang Yu let his emotions, his pride, his pity, his need to feel superior, totally interrupt strategic finality.
If you engage in a war of survival, you simply cannot stop halfway. If you stop halfway out of mercy, you only make the enemy more embittered and dangerous.
Okay, let's flip the board. What if you are the weaker party? What if you are Liu Bang trapped in the tent, or you are facing a massive institutional power that wants to crush you, and you have absolutely no leverage?
Then you deploy Law 22. Use the surrender tactic to transform weakness into power.
Bertolt Brecht, the German playwright. The way he handled the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1947 is an absolute masterclass in this.
Set the scene for us, because the context of the Red Scare is really crucial here.
Right, so it's the late 1940s. Cold War paranoia is peaking in America. Congress has set up this committee to root out communist sympathizers in Hollywood. They subpoena a group of screenwriters and directors who become known as the Hollywood 10.
And their strategy was resistance.
Complete, direct, aggressive confrontation. They got on the stand, they yelled at the committee members, they read the First Amendment aloud. They basically played the righteous martyrs.
And the committee members, who held all the institutional power, absolutely loved it.
They did. Confrontation gave the committee exactly what they wanted, which was an excuse to bring the hammer down. The Hollywood 10 were held in contempt of Congress, sent to federal prison, and blacklisted from the industry for years.
They destroyed their own capacity to create art.
But Brecht, who was a known Marxist and arguably the most radical writer of them all, took a completely different approach. He didn't yell. He showed up wearing a very nice suit.
He even brought a cigar and smoked it, subtly mirroring the committee chairman, who was also smoking a cigar.
He was incredibly polite. He surrendered to the format of the hearing.
Outwardly, he surrendered, but inwardly, he was executing a brilliant, brilliant evasion.
Yes, because Brecht spoke fluent English. He lived in Hollywood for years, but he brought an interpreter anyway.
This is the bad part.
Every time a congressman asked a harsh, aggressive question, Brecht would furrow his brow, turn to the interpreter, and have it translated into German. Then he would answer in German, using very dense, poetic, slightly confusing language, and have the interpreter translate it back to English.
He used linguistics smokescreens?
By the time the answer got back to the committee, the aggressive momentum of the interrogation was completely broken. They were baffled. They couldn't pin him down on a single thing.
Brecht yielded just enough to deny them the friction they needed to strike a spark.
And what was the result?
The chairman actually thanked Brecht for being an exemplary cooperative witness. Brecht walked out of the Capitol building a free man, packed his bags, and flew to Europe the very next day, where he spent the rest of his life writing revolutionary plays.
He sacrificed a moment of pride to secure a lifetime of operational freedom.
When you yield, you neutralize the aggressor's behavior. Aggressive power thrives on resistance. If you give them a brick wall, they will smash it. But if you give them a sponge, they exhaust themselves trying to punch it.
That's a great analogy.
Outward submission makes the authority figure feel important and respected, but it allows you to maintain your long-term maneuverability.
It's about controlling the options, which is Law 31. Getting others to play with the cards you deal. Ivan the Terrible, executed an incredible version of this in Russia.
Ivan the Terrible essentially weaponized his own absence to force a surrender from an entire nation.
It's 1564. Ivan is the Tsar, but he is incredibly frustrated. The Russian noble class, the boyars, are constantly scheming, defying his orders, hoarding power. Ivan knows if he just starts executing them randomly, it will spark a civil war.
He needs absolute, unquestioned authority, but he can't just take it by raw force.
So he orchestrates a crisis. One morning, the people of Moscow wake up, and the Kremlin is totally empty. Ivan has packed up his family, the royal treasury, the court, and he has just left.
He moves to a small, remote village outside Moscow.
He abdicates. He sends a letter to the church saying he is sick of the betrayal and he is stepping down.
And the psychology of this move is absolutely devastating. The common people of Russia are terrified of the boyars. The Tsar, as terrible as he was the only force keeping the corrupt nobles from completely exploiting the peasantry.
And Russia is surrounded by enemies at this time, right?
Yes, the Poles, the Swedes, the Tatars. Without a unified leader, the country faces imminent invasion and internal collapse.
Ivan created a vacuum of terror.
Exactly. He put the entire nation on the horns of a dilemma. Option A, let Ivan stay retired, descend into bloody civil war, and be conquered by foreign armies. Or option B, beg Ivan to come back, but strictly on his terms.
So the boyars and the clergy literally ride out to this village in the snow, weeping, and physically beg him to return.
And Ivan says, I will return to the throne, but only if you grant me the power of absolute dictatorial rule. I can execute anyone I want, seize any property I want, and no one can ever question me.
They agree.
They enthusiastically agree. Ivan didn't have to fight a civil war. He forced his victims to choose their own poison.
Because when people feel they have actively chosen a path, even if it's a terrible one, they are far less likely to rebel against it.
By controlling the options, he disguised his total manipulation as a rescue mission.
Which really comes down to the mastery of timing, doesn't it? Knowing exactly when to leave Moscow, knowing exactly how long to stay in the village before returning. This brings us to Law 35 and 29. Master the art of timing and plan all the way to the end.
The sources contrast two incredible historical figures here, Vasco Núñez de Balboa and Joseph Fouché.
Two men with completely opposite approaches to foresight. Let's start with Balboa. He's a Spanish conquistador in the early 1500s. He wants fame, glory, and gold.
Standard conquistador stuff.
Right. And he hears rumors of a massive ocean and an empire of gold on the other side of the treacherous jungles of Panama.
He is driven entirely by the romantic dream of El Dorado. It is an emotional obsession.
So Balboa hacks his way through the jungle, fighting off disease, starvation, indigenous tribes, and he actually accomplishes this incredible feat. He becomes the first European to cross the isthmus and set eyes on the Pacific Ocean.
A monumental discovery.
He wades into the water in his full armor and claims the entire ocean for Spain. He's a hero.
But he was so hyper-focused on the horizon that he ignored the ground right beneath his feet.
Right. Back in the settlement, a new governor named Pedrarius arrives. Pedrarius is jealous, paranoid, and politically connected back in Spain. But Balboa is so intoxicated by his discovery that he assumes he is completely untouchable.
He doesn't manage the politics back home. He doesn't secure his supply lines or alliances.
He didn't plan to the end. He achieved the goal, but he hadn't mapped out the aftermath of the goal.
And Pedrarius eventually arrests Balboa on trumped-up charges of treason and literally chops his head off. Balboa did all the hard work, and someone else reaped the ultimate reward.
Because planning to the end is the ultimate antidote to emotional improvisation. When you are driven by a romantic vision, you tend to ignore the vultures circling above you.
Compare that complete lack of foresight to Joseph Fouché.
Fouché's survival record is almost unbelievable. I mean, he lived through the most turbulent, deadly period of modern European history.
He really did. Fouché started as a moderate during the French Revolution. But when the political winds began blowing toward radicalism, he sensed the shift early.
Very early.
He cast the deciding vote to execute King Louis VI, cementing his status as a radical alongside Robespierre.
But then Robespierre initiates the Reign of Terror. The guillotine is running non-stop, chopping off heads left and right.
And Fouché realizes that Robespierre's fanaticism is a sinking ship. It is politically unsustainable. So Fouché quietly begins orchestrating a conspiracy behind the scenes, planting little seeds of doubt among the other ministers.
And right before Robespierre can turn the guillotine on Fouché,
Fouché springs the trap, and Robespierre is executed instead.
then the Directory takes over and Fouché makes himself useful to them. Then Napoleon Bonaparte comes along, overthrows the Directory, and what does Fouquet do?
He becomes Napoleon's Minister of Police. He builds the most extensive spy network in all of Europe, making himself completely indispensable to the emperor.
And it doesn't stop there. Years later, when Napoleon's empire begins to crumble and he is exiled, Fouquet seamlessly pivots again and serves the restored Bourbon monarchy.
The man survived a revolution, a reign of terror, an emperor, and a king, and he died peacefully in his bed with a massive fortune.
Fouquet was a master of timing because he never let emotion or loyalty tie him to a specific ideology or a sinking ship.
He was a detective of the right moment. He constantly smelled the wind, mapped out the permutations of the future, and always planned his exits before he even entered a room.
Okay, we've talked about how to handle overt enemies and navigate massive political conflicts. But the sources shift our focus now to something much more intimate and honestly, a lot more terrifying.
The danger of proximity.
Exactly. The idea that in the modern court, your biggest threats don't actually come from the rival army across the battlefield. They come from the people sitting right next to you.
Your bosses, your closest friends, and the people you try to help.
Let's start with the boss. Law 1, never outshine the master.
This is a rule about managing the incredibly fragile ego of narcissistic power. And the cautionary tale here is Nicolas Fouquet.
It's the 1660s. Fouquet is the finance minister for King Louis XIV. The prime minister has just died, and Fouquet desperately wants the job.
He wants to prove to the king that he is the most brilliant, well-connected, and cultured man in all of France.
Which was a fatal miscalculation of human psychology.
Truly fatal.
So Fouquet throws a party at his newly finished chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte, and calling it a party is honestly an insult. It was a legendary, mind-blowing spectacle.
He invited the king and the entire nobility.
They served a 7-course dinner featuring foods never before seen in France. He commissioned a brand new play by Molière. There were massive fireworks displays over perfectly manicured gardens.
Fouquet thought he was showing the king how indispensable he was.
But he forgot who he was dealing with. Louis XIV was the Sun King. His entire identity was predicated on being the absolute, unmatched center of the universe.
So, as Louis is sitting at this party, watching his own nobles gasp in awe at Fouquet's wealth and taste, what is the king actually feeling?
He feels small. He feels totally upstaged. Every smile directed at the finance minister felt like a theft of the king's own glory.
Exactly. Fouquet inadvertently pricked the king's monstrous vanity. He made the master feel insecure in his own supremacy.
And the result was brutal. The very next day, Louis XIV has Fouquet arrested on completely fabricated charges of embezzlement.
Fouquet spends the last 20 years of his life in a cold, solitary prison cell.
The king even confiscated the architect and the gardener from Fouquet's chateau just to build the Palace of Versailles.
Because all masters desperately want to appear more brilliant than they actually are. If you naturally outshine them with your charm, your intellect, or your success, you trigger their deepest insecurities.
So you have to learn to discreetly flatter them and somehow ascribe your creative ideas to their inspiration.
Galileo understood this perfectly.
Galileo is the perfect counterexample to Fouquet. For years, Galileo was a struggling scientist, heavily dependent on the unpredictable patronage of various Italian rulers.
He would invent a compass and give it to one duke, or write a paper and dedicate it to another, but it was a life of constant begging. He was always in danger of just being tossed aside.
But then he invents the telescope and discovers the 4 moons of Jupiter. This is a paradigm-shifting discovery. And instead of just publishing it to show off his own genius, he executes a brilliant political maneuver.
He turns the discovery into a giant mirror for the Medici family.
Right. The Medicis were the most powerful dynasty in Italy at the time. So Galileo didn't just name the moons after them. He created this elaborate cosmic mythology.
He pointed out that Jupiter was the symbol of the Medici dynasty's founder, and he said that the 4 moons orbiting Jupiter represented the 4 living Medici brothers.
He literally wrote that the heavens themselves were reflecting the glory of the Medici family. He made them the stars.
He didn't challenge their intellectual authority. He elevated them to a literal cosmic level.
In return, the Medicis made Galileo their official court philosopher and mathematician, guaranteeing his funding and security for life. He didn't compete with the master. He made the master shine brighter.
That is how you handle superiors. But handling equals, specifically friends, is often even more treacherous. Law 2 warns us, never put too much trust in friends.
The story of Michael III of the Byzantine Empire is chilling. Michael is the emperor. One day, his life is saved by a peasant named Basilius, who calms a wild horse that was about to kill the emperor.
So Michael is so incredibly grateful that he befriends Basilius. He brings this literal peasant into the royal court.
He elevates him way beyond his station. He makes Basilius the head of the royal stables, then he makes him a trusted counselor, he gives him massive amounts of gold, he even forces his own mistress to marry Basilius just to elevate his social standing.
Eventually, he makes Basilius the head of the entire army. Michael thinks he has bought absolute, unquestioning loyalty. He thinks, I made this man, therefore he will love me.
It is the most common and dangerous assumption in human relationships.
Because how does Basilius repay a lifetime of unbelievable generosity?
One night, after Michael has passed out from drinking, Basilius sneaks into the emperor's chambers with assassins, stabs him to death, and takes the throne for himself. He literally rode through the streets with his former friend's head on a pike.
Why does this happen? Why does generosity breed murder?
Because of the hidden resentment in charity.
Yes. When you hire a friend or bestow massive unearned favors upon them, you completely unbalance the relationship. True friendship is built on equality.
The receipt of a massive favor can become emotionally oppressive. It implies a hierarchy. It means they were chosen because they are a friend, not necessarily because they earned it.
They feel like a charity case.
Right. And that creates a heavy, heavy burden of gratitude. Over time, that gratitude ferments into envy. The friend begins to resent the very person who helped them because every time they look at you, they are reminded of their own dependence.
The sources argue you're actually far better off employing a former enemy. An enemy has something to prove. They don't expect favors, so they are motivated by self-interest and a desire to earn their place, which makes them far more predictable and reliable.
So we have to guard against the fragile egos of our bosses and the hidden envy of our friends. But there is a third category of people in our inner circle that the sources warn about: the infectors.
Law 10. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky.
This taps into the psychological reality of emotional contagion, doesn't it?
It does. Humans are highly, highly susceptible to the emotional states of those around them.
The ultimate infector was Lola Montez. She was a 19th century Irish woman who totally reinvented herself as a Spanish dancer and courtesan, and she left a trail of absolute apocalyptic destruction wherever she went.
She was a walking chaos vector.
She goes to Paris and seduces a prominent newspaper owner, Alexandre Dujarier. Dujarier is wealthy, successful, highly respected. But Lola is constantly stirring up drama, constantly feeling slighted by people.
She pushes Dujarier into a totally pointless duel over a perceived insult, and he is shot dead. His career, his life, ruined.
But the infection doesn't stop there.
No, she flees to Bavaria. She bewitches King Ludwig of Bavaria. The king is in his 60s, a patron of the arts, relatively peaceful guy. Lola manipulates him into making her a countess.
She becomes incredibly arrogant. She literally walks the streets of Munich with a riding crop, whipping anyone who doesn't bow to her, including university professors.
She single-handedly destroys the political stability of an entire nation.
Her behavior sparks riots. It actually triggers a civil war. King Ludwig is forced to abdicate his throne just to stop the violence. Lola flees again, and every man she marries or seduces after that ends up bankrupt, disgraced, or dead by suicide.
Lola Montez is the absolute archetype of the infector. These are people who draw misfortune upon themselves through their own inherent instability, their extreme emotional volatility, and their total inability to take responsibility.
But, and this is the insidious part, they always present themselves as victims of circumstance.
Right. They say, the world is just so cruel to me, I just have terrible luck.
And that triggers your empathy. You feel drawn to rescue them. You think, if I just give them a job or lend them some money or just love them enough, I can fix them.
But you cannot fix a Lola Montez. The chaos is a structural, unchangeable feature of their personality. If you get too close, the infection spreads to you. You end up spending all your time in political capital fighting their battles, and they just drag you under.
When you recognize someone who is chronically unhappy and consistently at the center of dramatic storms, you literally must flee their presence.
But wait. If friends are treacherous, bosses are insecure, and unlucky people are contagious, the natural reaction is to just isolate yourself. Just build a massive wall and trust no one.
But the sources explicitly warn against that in Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself.
Isolation is just as deadly as infection. Look at Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who first unified China and began building the Great Wall.
A man of unimaginable power.
But in his later years, he became so intensely paranoid of assassination that he completely isolated himself. He built a massive palace complex with 270 pavilions, all connected by secret underground tunnels.
He slept in a different room every single night. Anyone who revealed his location was executed on the spot. He completely cut himself off from human contact.
And what was the result of that total isolation?
It cost him his empire. Because he wasn't mingling with the court or the commoners, he completely lost access to the unscripted realities of his nation.
He became entirely reliant on a small, tight circle of eunuchs and ministers to feed him information.
He built a catastrophic information silo.
Exactly. And those ministers simply manipulated the information to serve themselves. He was an emperor in name only at that point, and the ending is incredibly pathetic.
He died while on a journey outside the capital. His ministers knew that if the public found out the emperor was dead, there would be a massive uprising.
So they hid his corpse in a carriage, and to cover up the smell of his rotting body in the summer heat, they surrounded his carriage with carts full of salted fish.
The most powerful man in the world, dead and hidden behind a pile of rotting fish, all because he isolated himself.
Building a fortress cuts you off from the lifeblood of power, which is information. It makes you an incredibly easy target because your enemies know exactly where you are, but you have no idea where they are. To survive, you must be permeable. You have to circulate, mingle, and gather intel from diverse sources.
Gathering intel leads us perfectly into the art of knowing your mark, laws 13, 14, and 19. If you are mingling and circulating, how do you actually leverage the people you interact with? Let's look at Law 13, appealing to self-interest.
The story of the Corcyraeans and the Corinthians in ancient Greece perfectly illustrates the cognitive bias of self-interest.
It's the build-up to the Peloponnesian War. Both the Corcyraeans and the Corinthians are facing imminent destruction, and they both travel to Athens to beg for a military alliance.
The Corinthians speak first. They stand before the Athenian assembly and give an impassioned speech about history. They list all the times in the past they have helped Athens. They appeal to honor, to debt, and they demand gratitude.
Which is a fundamentally flawed strategy, because, as we discussed, gratitude is a burden.
Right. Reminding someone of a past favor just makes them feel guilty and irritated. It's looking backward.
So the Corcyraeans get up. They bluntly admit that they have never helped Athens in the past. In fact, they've been hostile. But they point out that they have the second largest navy in all of Greece. And they say, if you ally with us, we will give you our ships to help you defeat your real enemy, Sparta.
Pure, unadulterated future leverage.
And Athens immediately chooses the Corcyraeans.
Because pragmatic people, especially those in positions of power, prioritize the future over the past. If you need help from someone, do not remind them of what you did for them yesterday. Figure out what they desperately need tomorrow and offer it to them.
Louis XIV did this on a massive scale. He literally saved Chinese civilization from Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan had conquered northern China, and his instinct as a nomadic warrior was just to level all the cities, slaughter the agrarian population, and let the grass grow so his horses could graze.
If Chukai had appealed to Khan's mercy, or human rights, or the cultural beauty of China, Khan would have laughed and chopped his head off.
Because Khan didn't value those things at all, Chukai knew Khan was motivated entirely by practical results and greed. So Chukai appealed to that self-interest.
He explained the concept of taxation. He showed Khan that if he let the people live and work the land, Khan could extract immense recurring wealth grain, silk, silver, every single year forever.
He literally turned a slaughterhouse into a revenue stream. Khan loved it, and millions of lives were saved.
But you can only know what motivates a person, whether it's naval power like Athens or taxation like Khan, if you gather intelligence on them. Law 14, pose as a friend, work as a spy.
Joseph Duveen, the greatest art dealer of the early 20th century, elevated spying to a high art.
Duveen wanted Andrew Mellon as a client. Mellon was one of the richest men in America, but he was incredibly stiff, taciturn, and guarded. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with Duveen, who was known for being a talkative, aggressive salesman.
So Duveen couldn't just knock on Mellon's door. He had to map the terrain first.
Duveen secretly tracked down Mellon's valet, his guards, and his staff, and put them on his own payroll. He paid them for years just to feed him micro details about Mellon's life.
What time did Mellon wake up? What clothes did he prefer? What specific obscure paintings was he actively looking for?
He gathered concrete, actionable knowledge, and then Duveen orchestrates an quote-unquote accidental meeting in a hotel elevator in London. Duveen is wearing the exact style of clothes Mellon respects. He is heading to the exact same obscure art gallery Mellon is visiting.
And when they start talking, Duveen casually expresses the exact same exquisite, specific taste in art that Mellon has.
Mellon is entirely charmed. He thinks he has found a true kindred spirit. He drops his formidable defenses and becomes Duveen's best, most lucrative client.
Duveen basically hacked Mellon's personality profile, which is why Law 19 is so critical. Know who you are dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person, because if you misread the personality profile, the results can be apocalyptic.
Mohammed, the Shah of Khwarez, committed one of the most fatal misreads in history.
It's the early 1200s. The Shah rules a massive, wealthy empire in the Middle East. Genghis Khan, who at this point is mostly known just in the East, sends an embassy to the Shah. It's a peaceful trade mission. Khan's letter basically says, I rule the lands of the rising sun, you rule the lands of the setting sun, let's trade and be equals.
Now, the Shah is incredibly arrogant. He looks at Khan as an uneducated barbarian upstart. He feels totally insulated by his massive, highly trained, traditional army.
So the Shah not only rejects the trade offer, he deeply humiliates the ambassadors. He shaves their beards and executes them, sending their heads back to Khan.
The Shah arrogantly assumed Khan was just another border nuisance who would be intimidated by a show of force. He wildly misunderstood the fundamental nature of the man he was dealing with.
Genghis Khan was not a border nuisance. He was a force of nature.
Khan mobilized his mobile guerrilla-like cavalry. He didn't just attack the border, he swept across the entire Khwarezmian Empire like a hurricane.
He completely decimated the Shah's massive, slow-moving armies. He diverted rivers to flood cities. He obliterated entire populations.
The Shah was forced to flee for his life, running from island to island, eventually dying of pleurisy, wearing rags on a deserted rock in the Caspian Sea. His empire was entirely erased from the map.
It is terrifying. You cannot deal blindly with whomever crosses your path. You have to take the measure of your mark. Are they an insecure boss like Louis XIV? Are they a paranoid firewall like Al Capone? Or are they a serpent with a long memory like Genghis Khan? Never, ever rely on your assumptions.
Okay, we are moving into the final and perhaps most profound section of our deep dive. We've talked about manipulating appearances, we've broken down the calculus of conflict, and we've navigated the treacherous waters of friends and masters. Now we reach the absolute pinnacle of power.
The theaters of authority.
Yes. This is the stage where you transcend the daily grind of manipulation. You don't even need to fight or speak directly anymore because your sheer aura, the mythology you have built around yourself, does all the heavy lifting for you.
Let's start with Law 5 and 16. Building a reputation, and then using absence to significantly increase your value. The story of Zhuge Liang in ancient China feels almost like a fantasy, but it perfectly illustrates the cognitive power of reputation.
Zhuge Liang was known as the Sleeping Dragon. He had cultivated a nationwide reputation for being the cleverest, most deceptive military strategist alive. He was famous for setting elaborate, invisible traps.
So one day, Zhuge Liang is resting in a small, remote town with only a tiny garrison of about 100 soldiers. Suddenly, he gets word that an enemy army of 150,000 troops, led by a brilliant general named Sima Yi, is marching straight for the town.
A mathematically hopeless situation. If he fights, he dies. If he runs, the cavalry will run him down.
But Zhuge Liang relies entirely on the architecture of his reputation. He orders his men to take down all the military flags. He orders them to throw open the city gates. He tells his soldiers to hide.
Then he puts on a simple Taoist robe, walks up to the most visible part of the city wall, lights some incense, and just sits there playing his lute and chanting softly.
Picture the scene when Sima Yi arrives at the head of 150,000 hardened soldiers. He sees the open gates. He sees the empty streets. He sees the sleeping dragon sitting alone on the wall, casually playing music.
Sima Yi's brain goes into complete overdrive. He knows Zhuge Liang's reputation. The open gates look like a massive, arrogant taunt.
Sima Yi is convinced that the town is rigged to explode, or that a massive ambush is waiting in the alleys. The reputation of the sleeping dragon is so terrifyingly powerful that Sima Yi orders his 150,000 troops to immediately turn around and retreat without firing a single arrow.
Zhuge Liang defended a city using an invisible, invincible army built entirely out of cognitive bias. Sima Yi essentially defeated himself.
But how do you build an aura that commands that much respect? One of the most counterintuitive ways is through Law 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. It is the economic law of scarcity applied to human presence.
Dios the Mede.
Exactly. The Medes were an ancient people who had broken free from the Assyrian Empire, but without a centralized government, their society descended into total chaos. Village infighting, blood feuds, lawlessness.
Deicles was a respected, fair-minded man in his village. People started coming to him to settle disputes. He was so good at it that people from other villages started traveling to see him. He became the sole functioning arbiter of justice in the land. He was incredibly powerful and popular.
But he realized a psychological truth. Too much circulation makes the price go down. If you are constantly seen, constantly accessible, constantly solving everyone's problems, you become ordinary. You become a habit.
So at the absolute height of his popularity, Deicles just stopped. He refused to hear any more disputes. He retired.
And without him, the entire country plunges right back into bloody chaos. The people suddenly realize what they have lost. The sudden scarcity of his wisdom makes it infinitely more valuable.
So the leaders of all the villages come to him and beg him to be king. And Deicles agrees, but he dictates incredible terms. He forces them to build an enormous, fortified palace in the center of a new capital city.
And once he moves in, he makes himself completely inaccessible. He communicates only through written messages passed by guards. No one from his old life is allowed to see him.
By withdrawing completely, Deicles created an aura of divinity. If he had stayed in the village square, mingling with the commoners, they would have eventually seen his flaws and overthrown him. By making himself a myth, a distant, unseen force, he ruled unchallenged for decades.
Which flows right into the concept of recreating yourself. Laws 25 and 34. Recreate yourself and act like a king to be treated like one. I love the story of Aurore Dupin.
A true Promethean artist of her own identity. It's the early 19th century. Aurore Dupin moves to Paris because she wants to be a writer, but Parisian society at the time is incredibly rigid and patriarchal.
The literary establishment looks at her and says, women write silly romances or they stay home, make babies, not literature. Society attempted to assign her a restrictive, predefined role.
But she refused to accept it. She realized that if she played by their rules, she would be marginalized forever. So she forged an entirely new identity. She changed her name to George Sand.
And it wasn't just a pen name, it was a complete theatrical recreation of her persona.
She started wearing long, tailored men's coats and heavy boots. She smoked cigars in public. She dominated conversations at cafes with the most famous male artists of the day, like Chopin and Liszt. She was completely unapologetic and utterly confident in her fabricated persona.
And society was captivated by her. She became one of the most successful and famous writers in Europe. Her male persona protected her private vulnerability, but it gave her this larger-than-life, untouchable presence in public.
The lesson is that society will always try to put a label on you. You have to take control of your appearance, your emotions, and your narrative, and mold your own identity like clay.
It's the strategy of the crown. And no one executed that strategy with more audacity than Christopher Columbus.
Columbus is a fascinating case study in projected self-worth. Look at his actual resume. He was the son of a cheese seller and a weaver from Genoa. He was not an aristocrat. He had very little formal navigational qualification.
But he had this burning belief that he could reach the East Indies by sailing west. But to do that, he needed the backing of a major monarchy.
So he fabricates this myth. He alters his family tree to claim he's descended from Italian aristocracy. And when he finally gets an audience with King Juan II of Portugal, and later Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain, he doesn't walk in like a beggar asking for a favor.
He walks in acting like he is already a king.
He demands an outrageous package. He doesn't just want ships. He demands the title of Grand Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He demands to be made viceroy of all new lands he discovers. And he demands 10% of all future commerce from those lands, forever.
He asked for the moon.
And he did it with this quiet, unshakable calm. If he had shuffled his feet, acted nervous, or apologized for his lack of credentials, the monarchs would have dismissed him as a delusional peasant.
But because he demanded the highest honors with absolute conviction, acting exactly how a high-born noble would act,
the monarch's brains filled in the gaps. It's a chain of cognitive cause and effect. The monarchs unconsciously assumed if he is asking for this much with this much confidence, he must possess some secret knowledge or divine backing that we don't know about. He must be worth it.
a crown creates an aura. If you believe you are destined for great things and you project that belief without wavering, people will organize their reality around your projection.
Okay, we've reached the absolute master level, the dark arts of the theatrics of authority. Laws 27 and 32. Playing to people's fantasies to create a cult-like following.
This is the science of charlatanism.
The sources take us to 16th century Venice. Venice had been the glorious center of world trade, but now it is in steep decline. The wealth is drying up, the empire is shrinking, the citizens are depressed and desperate.
That context is vital. Fantasy cannot take root in a contented mind. It requires the backdrop of the oppressive, humdrum, declining mundane reality. People in pain are desperate for a miracle.
Enter a mysterious man known as Il Bragadino. He claims to be an alchemist who possesses a secret substance that can multiply gold. He comes to Venice, and he doesn't beg for money. He lives in a sumptuous palace paid for by the Republic. He travels with two massive black mastiffs. He dresses in the finest silks.
He projects the absolute image of wealth and mystery.
And he strings the government along for months. He doesn't actually produce any gold. When the Senate finally demands proof, he acts highly offended. He says his magical substance needs 7 years to mature before it can multiply the gold in the mint.
When they push him further, he packs up and leaves town in a huff, maintaining his illusion to the very end.
And it wasn't just him. Francesco Giuseppe Borri did the exact same thing a century later. He spun tales of angelic visions, claimed he had the Philosopher's Stone, demanded vows of absolute poverty from his followers, took all their wealth, and rode around Europe in a coach studded with jewels.
When I read this, I immediately thought of certain modern tech gurus or extreme wellness influencers or even some fringe political figures today. The mechanics of the cult are exactly the same.
The playbook hasn't changed in 500 years. Keep the promises vague but massive. Emphasize visual spectacle over intellectual debate. Invent a strict us versus them dynamic to isolate your followers from rational outside criticism.
Because human beings have an overwhelming, unbearable need to believe in something transcendent. They cannot endure the emptiness of doubt or the slow, grinding reality of incremental progress.
If you offer a desperate population a rational, complex solution that requires hard work and sacrifice, like telling the Venetians they need to build better ships and reform their tax code, you'll be ignored or actively hated.
But if you offer them an elixir, a sudden romantic transformation, a pill that fixes everything, or a magical return to a golden age,
they will throw their money at you. They will willingly, actively ignore all rational red flags because the fantasy you are offering is too comforting to abandon.
Wow. Okay, let's take a breath and step back. Look at the massive, sprawling journey we have just taken through the mechanics of human nature. We've covered an incredible amount of behavioral architecture.
We started entirely inward, with the emotional discipline of the two-faced god Janus, learning to suppress the reactive anger and use the past only for cold data collection. We moved outward, designing the velvet glove, using the brilliant, distracting smoke screens of the Yellow Kid and the hacker-like selective honesty of Count Victor Lustig.
We navigated the grim calculus of conflict, learning from Michelangelo how to win without arguing, and learning from the tragic hesitation of Zhang Yu why you must completely neutralize a threat's operational capacity.
We mapped the treacherous inner circle, surviving the narcissistic vanity of Louis XIV, the fatal burden of gratitude with Basilius, and the emotional contagion of Lil Montez. And finally, we ascended to the theatrics of authority, building invincible reputations like the Sleeping Dragon, projecting absolute self-worth like Columbus, and understanding the dangerous alchemy of human fantasy.
The court of 16th century Venice, the battlefields of ancient China, the palaces of Versailles, the costumes have changed, but the neurobiology driving the actors has not.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here. When you look at your own life, the dynamics in your office, the passive-aggressive battles in your social circles, the narratives being pushed on your media feeds right this very second, these exact same laws are operating beneath the surface. The velvet gloves are everywhere.
And that brings us to the final provocative truth about power. Power is essentially a neutral tool. It is a fundamental force of human interaction. It is completely amoral.
Like electricity.
Precisely like electricity. Electricity has no morals of its own. It doesn't care if it is powering a life-saving ventilator in a hospital or if it is powering an electric chair. It simply illuminates or electrocutes, depending entirely on who has their hand on the switch and how the current is applied.
So as you navigate your week, look closely at the interactions around you. Who is subtly playing the sucker to lower your defenses? Whose unexpected honesty is actually a Trojan horse meant to bypass your firewall? And whose velvet glove are you currently mistaking for genuine affection? Master your emotions, control your narrative, or rest assured, someone else will definitely master them for you. Stay curious, keep your eyes open, and don't let anyone force you into a role you didn't write for yourself. We'll see you on the next deep dive.